Singapore has had a steady foreign policy based on our national interests, but the world is changing and Singapore is also changing. So in your view, how has our foreign policy evolved? And also, what has changed and what has remained constant?
Well, both the world as well as Singapore has changed. The world, 20 years ago, we were still in a kind of post-Cold War environment, meaning the Americans were very dominant. Globalization, multilateralism, people talk about free trade, people talk about international division of labor. Thomas Friedman says the world is flat. And we were prospering in that environment. Today, the world is not flat. Today, the great powers are at odds with one another. China is playing a much more dominant role. It's become very much stronger in the last 20 years and more prosperous. There are tremendous tensions which have arisen. Russia with the US, China and EU too. And we are dealing with a very troubled world. Confidence in free trade has also been shaken. People now talk about first they talk about fair trade. That means I don't want it to be so free. Then they talk about national security considerations, which are important. Resilience. What if you become hostile to me? What if there's COVID? That's important too. Then they talk about reshoring, bringing it back home. Do it at home. But that sounds protectionist. And they talk about friend shoring. I will do business with friends. Now, who's my friend? So it's a very troubled external environment. And we are sailing into it. Domestically, we've changed. In 20 years, we've become more prosperous. I think our diplomacy has helped us to carve a spot in the world. People recognize us. I think there's a certain respect for us. That's good. At the same time, we are very much more connected to the world. In the sense that in the old days, foreign policy is foreign policy, and what's domestic? Well, Singaporeans will leave the foreign policy to the government. But today, you're so exposed. You've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got WhatsApp, you've got TikTok. You've got people traveling, and you've got all sorts of things coming in, and Singaporeans being influenced by videos, by memes, by messages. So your foreign policy and domestic situation has been linked together. So we have to adapt to that, and our foreign policy has to adapt to that. What has not changed, we are still a little red dot, a bit redder, but still little. We are still in the middle of Southeast Asia, neighbors bigger than us, region prospering but troubled. We are still depending on an international rule of law, on international trade, on our sea lines of communications being open, being able to talk to everyone in the world and do business and get our food and our supplies, and needing to protect our interests where everybody is jostling with one another, and we are not the biggest person in the discussion. And we have to hold our own, which takes quite a lot of doing and keeps MFA very busy.